It's almost like Kel's death was just like the start of almost this fucking play we're currently living out. Just like the tragedy of Kel's death. I feel like Kel needs some type of justice, or at least having both sides of the story known. Not just to be like fuck her mother, but to be like fuck the media, fuck what they've done.
All that's out there is slanderous lies and not the way that anyone who loved Kel would want her to be remembered. It's all just about honouring her memory and honouring her as a person, and not letting the person who, ruined her life to be the one to, write the narrative for what Kelly's life was.
This is a podcast for Kel.
Okay, sorry, that was a weird way to start the voice message.
This is Kel, age 23.
That fucking word, neither. Like, I say it properly all the time when I'm referring to neither the mug or the cup or something like that, right? But I have this bad habit from when I was a kid, where I always say, when I'm referring to myself, I always say me neither. What the fuck?
This podcast is a very strange thing to be putting out in public because it's extremely personal to all of the people that you're going to hear speak. We all wish that we didn't have to do this, but everyone agrees that we have to say something about what happened. We're going to tell you the story of a young woman that we all loved, but it's not easy to listen to. It talks about mental illness, suicide, narcissistic abuse. It's the story of someone who was failed by systems and people who were meant to protect her. It's also the story of a surreal court case and a twisted public campaign which formed after Kelly's death and saw her reputation shredded in front of thousands of people. And for anybody who first became aware of Kel because of the scandal that followed her death, these podcasts are evidence. But mostly it's an attempt to understand the short but extraordinarily eventful life of Kelly Gordillo. That wasn't the name that she was born with, but at the end of her life, that's the name that she wanted to be known by. I'm John Gordillo. I was Kelly's stepdad. And the story of how that came about, of how she and I came to see each other as father and daughter, like a lot of other things in Kel's life, is complicated. And it was forged under quite extreme conditions. And you're going to hear all about that. But there are more important things that we have to tell you about first. Kel lost her life on April the 7th, 2018. She was 23 years old. Her death was shattering. She was born in 1994 in London, and she lived in London for most of her life. In the last 18 months of her life, she was working as a chef, having graduated from the Cordon Bleu in 2016. She was an extremely cultured person, and it was very important to her to be cultured and to be educated. She had tumultuous love relationships, and she thought far too much about them. They consumed her. But also, when her back was against the wall, she'd just offer great advice. She was very grounded. She was extremely wise. And she was so sharp and bright. It just fell out of her. This is her, age 22, around here in the summer of 2017.
All right, this is somebody called Warrior Philosopher.
Nine.
Nine.
She's going through the profiles of people on Guardian Soulmates who've shown an interest in her.
I hate when people use I don't know. It annoys me that he's written in his tagline contains smorgasbord of attributes, both physical and mental. It's not that smorgasbord is such a low frequency word that he sounds like Will Self writing out a dating profile, but at the same time it is kind of irritating. You can just say complex bloke. Do you know what I mean? He doesn't have to.
There's another reason this podcast is being made, and that's to give Kel a voice. And that's because of the shocking things that were said about her after she died. I have about a dozen hours of audio recordings of Kel taken between the ages of 18 and 23. I have a tradition in my family that goes back to my childhood. My grandfather used to do this and record family scenes on the reel-to-reel. It's a better way of having family snapshots than photographs, really. And so I would do that. Sometimes I put the voice recorder out at Christmas, or if there was a gathering or there was an interesting conversation happening. And I also, at one point, I did a show which talked about my relationship with Kel, and so I recorded a couple of scenes between me and her for that.
But if it works,
Sometimes Kel was happy to be recorded. Other times, it was like this.
I remember we did a reunion thing, and they were like, they seemed to be kind of, stop recording me.
I'm recording our conversation.
No,
I'm recording
fuck
our
off.
conversation.
The Kel you hear on these recordings is how she was. It's what she felt about her life. And it's very strange to have them in light of this mad fight that broke out after she died, because some of what she says in the recordings is explosive. So you're going to hear Kelly speak for herself quite a lot in these podcasts, especially in the later episodes. But this first edition isn't really typical of the ones that are going to follow. This first one is about the things that happened after Kelly died, because you have to know why it is that all of the people that you're going to hear speak, why we feel so strongly about this, why we feel that this is the best way to deal with what happened. It's a really mad story, and there's so much that has to be explained before we can even get to what this is about, which is Kel. So let's begin.
One of the first people you would have ever laid eyes on. Kel.
Definitely, probably the first.
What are you doing? Don't touch
Our
it.
story starts in early November 2018, 5 days after Kelly's funeral. Kelly had died in April, but it had taken us 7 months before we could lay her body to rest. But even though we'd finally had the funeral, it hadn't brought any closure.
You're like very poetic.
This is Kelly's godfather, Uncle Des.
How are you feeling, Tess?
I'm feeling very raw. It's like I'm not don't have to process it all, because is it grief? Is it vengeance? Is it anger? And I think the person who will not name still overshadows everything. And when I think of Kel, I think of her. I'm having struggle separating the two.
That's the problem with this.
Because she had such an influence and such a presence over her and everybody around her. It wasn't just Kel, it was everybody around her. I don't know if it's because of other funerals you go to and there's a sort of procedure where the shock, the preparation for the funeral, the grief, the coming together of family and friends after. This didn't happen in that sort of way. So I'm having struggle processing it. I'm still back in court. I'm still back there thinking, why are we going through this case? Why have you brought us to this place? Why are you selling these lies?
Everyone who was involved with our case would be saying, what do you do in cases
There's
like
nothing
this?
I
And
could
there's no cases like
There's
this.
nothing I could even draw on in my
Right.
life to help me understand it more. It's
Right.
just a new phenomenon.
Kelly's death hadn't just been shocking in its own right. It had triggered a bitter family argument, which had turned into a truly bizarre court case over what to do with Kelly's remains and her estate. On the one side had stood Kelly's estranged mother, who Kel hadn't seen for 6 years, and on the other, literally everyone who Kel had ever trusted or confided in her life. The whole thing dragged on for 6 months, and throughout that time, Kelly's body was just in a freezer in the morgue, decomposing. The case itself was a twisted battle for Kelly's soul and legacy, and even though it was extremely distressing to deal with, it should have remained what it was, a private family matter. But things spilled out, and the case had gone public, and terrible allegations had been made, both about Kel and the people in her life, and they had got traction. The story was covered in the press, and it was discussed on the internet, and people far and wide tweeted about it, and had speculated on Kelly's life and death on forums. Thousands of people came to accept a horrifically distorted account of Kel's life, and this story became the way that people who'd never met her now thought of her. And that story would have you believe that Kel ended her life as a prostitute and a drug addict, isolated from the people who could have protected her, groomed, trafficked, sexually exploited, and coerced into a life from which death offered the only escape. For those of us watching all this, who knew the truth about Kel and what had really happened to her, it made our stomachs turn.
this entitlement in the guise of political correctness.
This is one of Kel's school friends, Katie.
And I think that we need to call them out, and I don't care if we're trying to win them over. They need to feel bad about what they did because they picked over her like she was a fucking body in the middle of the desert. Like, they're disgusting, and we need to hold these people accountable. And that really was what troubled me a lot of the last 7 months, is this. Thinking of these strangers fucking making assumptions about Kel, going on her social media, saying that she was, this young black girl couldn't possibly know who David Bowie is, all this fucking shit. Well, those people need to be taken to task because they're fucking reprehensible.
None of Kelly's friends and family had been on social media. And in fact, many of Kel's friends had resisted approaches by journalists during the trial. This is Kelly's Aunt Rachel.
The main agenda, which it seems to me that is on that side, is just to destroy Kel. Yeah. Now she's not here to defend herself, but wait, there's people still here that are going to defend Kel till the day we are with her, yeah? And that's what they need to realise, and that's what they don't seem to get.
Grandma Della was Kelly's closest blood relative. She speaks here for all of us.
I think we would like to get Kelly's story out, the truthful story, because she's been portrayed so badly and so many lies have been told. We think that we have to do something.
My independence is not in jeopardy.
As long as you maintain that.
That's always.
Kel always thinks for herself.
And I always think about maintaining my independence. It's always the first thing. It's not a problem.
As long as that is not a stake.
Yeah, it's not.
There's a moment in the last recording I've got of Kel, taken just 3 months before she died on January the 3rd, 2018.
What's good about cutting it properly?
She's taken me and my dad out for dinner, and we'd spoken that night quite a lot about her childhood. You'll hear more of that conversation in later episodes. But there's a point where I ask her,
what do you think your upbringing and what do you think it has actually given you?
I mean, I kind of know that I have to fix things on my own.
the self-reliance of that answer, the fact that she thought she had to do everything for herself, was typical Kel. It appalled her to think that she might be a burden to people, and she often thought that she was when she wasn't. It's hard not to think about that side of her when I think about her death. 3.5 weeks before she died, Kel had admitted herself to a mental health hospital in London, seemingly because she'd been badly affected by the breakup of her last relationship. But very quickly, she seemed to have recovered. She was making plans to move forward with her life and appeared to be accepting the new realities. She was in touch with a lot of people, friends and family, whilst she was at this hospital. And it was the same with everyone. We all believed that she was moving forward and recovering. And then, in the early hours of Saturday, April the 7th, the weekend that she was planning to discharge herself, she took her laptop cable and slung it over the door of the bathroom in her room, and she hung herself. I mean, part of what this podcast is inevitably about is the sense of loss that we feel and the pain of it at every level. Firstly, how could Kelly have gone? What could she have felt that made her do that? How would we live without her? She was indispensable to many of us. But also, how could it happen in a hospital? They have checks for this kind of thing. Isn't she supposed to be safe there? That's the real question. Ultimately, this whole podcast is about why, how, what happens to a person, and how can those of us around them be so blind to what now is obvious? This was avoidable. And the fucking anguish of it, the guilt, the certainty that there are things I could have done that would have saved her life, and the fact that I know at least 3 or 4 other people feel the same way. But despite that, if it hadn't been for what happened next, we probably wouldn't have thought to make a podcast out of this.
Her mother had reared her head out of the blue after 6 years and was causing a lot of trouble. And then I was in touch with...
What kind of trouble did you hear was being caused?
It was unclear at that point. I assumed that she wanted the possessions. I didn't realise that it would go as far as it did.
It was just a couple of days after Kelly passed that we were informed by the coroner that Kelly's mother was in touch with them and was expecting to have Kel's body and possessions released to her. Kel hadn't seen her mother for 7 years. She'd not had any contact with her for 5.5, and in fact hadn't lived with her for 9 when, as a teenager, her mother had sent her to live in Barbados under very bad circumstances. The mother's reappearance now, after all this time, set off alarm bells in Kelly's family. And when I say Kel's family, I mean her maternal grandmother, Della, who lived in Barbados, as well as all of her aunts and cousins in Barbados, the United States, and New Zealand, her biological father and his mother, Kel's paternal grandmother, and their family who lived in North London, her maternal aunt who lives in London, her godfather, Uncle Des, her close circle of friends who'd stood by Kel over the years and become a part of her extended family, and me, her stepdad, along with my dad. These were the people that Kel considered her family. And this network of people, we were all talking with each other. We were all in shock, we were consoling each other, and we were starting to make plans for Kel's funeral. Kel's mother, returning now, worried us all on 2 fronts. Firstly, because she'd shown literally no interest in Kel while she was alive. But more to the point, we, all of us, either knew of or had directly witnessed the impact of Kel's relationship with her mother on Kel. These are Kelly's school friends, Katie, Carla and Jasmine. Why were you against her mother being involved? Because normally you'd kind of go, well, the mother should be involved.
No, because Kel had told me consistently over our entire friendship that her mother was her abuser. The last time I saw Kelly before she died, we spoke in depth about this and how it had caused her suffering to the day she died, what had happened with her mother. So obviously I was surprised that she would turn up out of the blue. To be honest, I was even surprised that she was notified. She was that inconsequential to Kelly's life, except in a negative way.
Kel took her life in April, and none of us even expected her mum to show up because we hadn't thought about the mother in however many years.
It's so long.
Except when Kel was maybe drunk and upset, or then somehow past came up, or childhoods or families. She didn't come up as a mother. She didn't,
Why? What was your understanding why Kel was estranged from her mum?
From how her mum treated her when she was younger, all the stories she's told us, and you could tell that that is affecting her in her adult life.
So why was this different from other cases of just people not getting on with their mums and, doesn't everybody hate their mum when they're 15 kind of thing?
We weren't 15. We were between the ages of 18 and 22. She was 23.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just a tiff she had with my mum. Oh my god, I hate my mum so much. It was a long period of no, we don't talk about her. She's not in Kel's life.
She wasn't. She told that she looked like her mum and was.
She was crying. I think she had to go home.
Yeah, she had to go. We were out, and the night ended for her.
Yeah.
She was devastated.
How long did you know Kel for? From when? What age?
I guess she was year 9, maybe 14.
Year 9 is what, 14?
Right. Around 14, I think. She would. I told her once, so I saw your mum on. And how do you feel about what she said? Because she was making fun of her, and she said that she hated it, and then other people filled me in that it was really bad. And then as I got to know her more, it became clearer and clearer to me that they just had a horrible relationship, and she wouldn't really speak about her that much, to be honest. When she did, it was negative. Like I said in my statement, whenever we would hang out in Priory Park and stuff at night, she would always be terrified to go back to her mother because she knew she would be punished just for socialising with us.
Kel had ended her relationship with her mother in 2012, writing to her in a series of mails that she called her divorce mails. In those mails she said, "All you've ever done is abuse me." I had seen some of that myself during the last 2 years of my relationship with Kel's mother, because Kel, who was then age 12, and her mum came to live here. And what I saw of Kelly's treatment at the hands of her mother was terrible. There were very intense and dramatic scenes, which ended in social services taking Kel out of her mother's care and Kel being hospitalised. And so I'd stayed in touch with her after her mother had sent her to Barbados to live with her grandmother. And we'd maintained the relationship. And then when Kelly was 18, she moved back to London and she lived here with me for a few years. But the one thing that I'd noticed that also was backed up by all of Kel's family members who I came to meet over the years was that Kel's mother just didn't want her. And I know that that is a difficult thing for some people to understand. It's difficult for me to understand as well. But this is what we all witnessed. It's not going to be possible to talk seriously about Kel without discussing the role that her mother played in her life. This is Kelly's close friend, Tobiana.
We're talking about this in terms of mental health, and we're talking about how Kel struggled with her mental health. But it's also quite hard to speak about Kel's mental health struggle without speaking about the mother's. The two are so intrinsically linked, whether it's like, whether you think about it from a biological point of view, whether you think about it from like a nature-nurture point of view, they're so intrinsically linked.
Kelly's mother is a real one-off. She's a very charismatic, compelling and persuasive figure who's quite a well-known stand-up comedian and is also a journalist and political activist. And look, there's no doubt about it, Kelly's mother could be absolutely wonderful. I went out with her for 5 years. I was madly in love with her. But in her private life, at least up until 2009, she was an extremely manipulative, controlling and abusive character. The subject of Kelly's mother is quite a difficult one. I'm not going to pretend to you that I don't have a personal axe to grind. And everybody you're going to hear on this podcast has spent hours trying to fathom and understand the motives of Kelly's mother and why she acts as she does. And ultimately it doesn't get us closer to anything that matters. So we're just going to try and stick to the facts and describe the behaviour that we witnessed, or which is corroborated by other sources, not the least of which, as you'll hear, is Kel. But now, years later, Kelly's mother was back, wanting to manage Kelly's affairs. She'd be the person now deciding how Kelly would be remembered. And Kel would have just hated that. The very last person that she would want going through her things. The person that she'd shielded herself from. The person she'd been most hurt by.
It's very clear. We all know what she would have wanted. Everybody who was in her life in the last 5 years of her life would have known what she wanted.
That was Tobiana. This is Katie again.
There's no doubt in my mind about how she felt about her mum, if it has to be said. Like, the last time I saw her, she said exactly that. She said that she was going back in and opening boxes of her memories of her childhood, and that she was thinking of giving up her dream of being a mother because she didn't want to. She thought, you know, I'm crazy, I'm messed up, and I don't want to do the same thing to my children as my mother did to me. She said that with her own words. She said that.
Yeah, I had similar conversations with her.
I mean, there is no way that she would want to be possessed in death by her abuser. Like, no one would.
When somebody dies without leaving a will, there's an order of inheritance that the law applies. First in line is the spouse. Second in line are any surviving children. 3, the biological parents. And 4, any others who might claim such rights under special circumstances. Now, Kelly was neither married nor had children, so the mother's claim to want to pick up her affairs was completely legal. However, in that claim, she was opposed by Kelly's natural father, Junior, who was also in touch with the coroner. Kelly's mother had made it very difficult for Junior to have a relationship with his daughter while Kel was growing up, and it was only after Kelly came to live with me when she was 18 that she started to have regular contact with him. Junior and I first met just over a week after Kelly died, and even though we're both very different people on the surface, we were both bonded by our love of Kel and by the recognition that each of us had been, in different ways, her fathers. And we both had shared similar experiences of going out with Kelly's mother, albeit 10 years apart. We'd both found her to be extremely conflictive and physically violent. And Junior reported seeing behaviours of Kelly's mother towards her when she was just a baby that made him feel disturbed. So Junior and I, supported by both of Kelly's grandmothers, decided that we would write to the mother in order to see if we could make agreement with her, in order at the very least that we could have a funeral quickly and lay Kelly's body to rest. It was instantly obvious that that wouldn't be possible. Instead of focusing on what Kelly's wishes for what should happen to her after her death might have been, the mother instead alleged that all three of us, Junior, Kelly's grandmother and me, were abusive types who had either enabled or committed serious abuse against her or Kel. Over different mails, she said that one or other of us should not be allowed to attend the funeral. At one point, she forwarded Kelly's birth certificate as proof that Junior wasn't Kelly's natural father, but all it showed was that Kel's mother simply hadn't written Junior's name on the birth certificate when Kelly was born. When Junior, who'd actually been present at Kelly's birth, offered to take a DNA test, the allegation went away. The mother then said that she had been investigating me. She threatened to expose the low levels of child support that she said I was paying my firstborn son. She said that she'd been in touch with my ex-partners, investigating the murky relationship that she alleged I'd had with Kel, who the mother claimed I had had an unnatural sexual interest in and who I'd turned against her. I'd not had any contact with Kelly's mother for 9 years, but it was quite clear that nothing had changed. This was how she'd always managed to get people to back down to her in the past, by making threats, by inventing conspiracies against her, and portraying herself as a victim. Of real concern was what Kelly's mother might do with any information she might find on Kelly's laptop and phone. This wasn't, as she would later go on to say in public, because the laptop and phone contained evidence of criminal conduct that we were trying to cover up, but because we all knew and were seeing all over again the mother's propensity to twist and distort information to suit her own strange ends. And so Junior, Kel's natural father, Della, Kel's maternal grandmother, and me, her stepdad, brought a claim against the mother in the High Court. We each made individual applications to be administrator of Kel's estate, but we also said that we didn't really mind, saying that we would be quite happy if any of us were to be appointed Kel's executor. Anyone, in fact, except Kel's mother. I know that the fact we did this and were prepared to go through this must sound incredibly strange to people. It sounds strange to even tell you about it now. I'm simply telling you that this is how we felt. It was our view that the abuse of Kel had been so bad, and Kelly's views about it were so clear, that there was no way that we could allow this person to come in at the last minute and claim her. In this, we were supported by Kelly's last boyfriend, who'd known her intimately and who's extremely wealthy, and said that financially he would support this in any way that was necessary. We were also supported by about 50 to 60 other people, 30 of whom wrote letters and or statements describing what they'd seen or Kel had told them about over the years. It was madness that this case was going to happen in the middle of all of this grief, and now we had this mad shit fight to deal with. But we felt incredibly protective towards Kel, who, as you'll hear over the series, struggled deeply with her mother's legacy. We couldn't let it happen. We had the means to stop it, and so we went to court for Kelly.
But you know what? No, actually, no, it doesn't sound strange, and I think that's why I keep going back to it. Now I've said it out loud, even though I do correct myself and say the word neither in the, correct way. Me neither sounds better than me neither, or I guess neither do I, or neither the chair nor the sofa. You can't sit there, you bastard.
For the next few minutes, this story takes a different turn. For the first month or so, everything you've just heard about, it was all very unpleasant to deal with, but it was running more or less privately. But then, in the middle of May, the mother started tweeting about what was going on to her 10,000 followers. This is war. My daughter was not strong enough to fight, but luckily she has me for a mother. All of my media friends, I will need help. Right now, I am going to raise an army. will get the truth out about what happened to my firstborn child. Today I stand and fight for every woman and girl that was not listened to. I have heard you. I have seen you. I am fighting for you all. Let black girls be children. At John Gordillo messed with the wrong one. Social services call this man a predator. He was told countless times to leave my kid alone. I am fighting the man that groomed my child for custody of her dead body. Yesterday, I sat outside of his house for 5 hours. I am home safe and sound now. I will kill this man. Your life ends today. You motherfucker, I'm on my way. Why did you touch my child? It ends today. In fact, there'd been a taste of all of this a few days earlier where the mother had created 2 fake accounts, one on Twitter and one on Facebook. The Twitter one was called Exposing John Gordillo, which repeated again and again the allegation that I was a paedophile who'd driven Kelly to her death at various high-profile comedians and production companies in comedy that I'd worked with. Not that you'd know from listening to this, but I'm an ex-stand-up comedian, and I've worked quite a lot as a director and a writer in comedy for other people. The Twitter account featured new, lurid accusations. Was it at John Gordillo that pushed this child into escorting? What other seedy things did he involve her in? Why wouldn't he leave this little girl alone? Why was he told by social services to stay away from her? Why wouldn't he? Over on the mother's official Twitter account, her ire turned to other members of the family, including her own mother, Kelly's grandma Della. How many girls have been sexually abused on your watch, Dolores? If only I'd known before I trusted you with my child. Arrest this child trafficking bitch mother of mine. Why did you take money and gifts from John Gordillo? Why did you let him near my child after what social services told you? Reaching an audience of about 10,000 followers, her tweets started to attract likes and retweets. My heart is broken reading tweets. No mum should be thinking of bearing their own child, let alone fending off vultures who are claiming ownership of their child. We need to do more for black girls. If you have 5 minutes today, please read, witness, and amplify story. Is fighting to recover the body of her daughter. In court, she's facing someone known to be a malignant figure in the UK comedy scene. His daughter was groomed, stalked, and sexually exploited by her ex-partner. Every parent should read timeline and see what a vile hashtag predator at John Gordillo is. You are a perp, a criminal, a child rapist. She was not your daughter, but your victim. You're disgusting. We all know that you killed her, and those who choose to sympathize with you are garbage. The body of child rapist, may you rot in prison. Justice will be served.
You're a dirty fucking perv. I hope someone comes behind her and sticks knives up your ass and then fucking kills you in your eye, you horrible dirty paedophile bastard.
I received over 100 messages like that, tweets, voice messages, Facebook posts, and obviously being in the middle of all of that, it was horrific seeing yourself turned into this Harvey Weinstein, Jimmy Savile kind of character, and to see all of your work dry up and all of that. But also to realize that whatever happened next, you had some explaining to do, and that there would be a sizable chunk of people that would just instantly see you with suspicion, no matter what you said. But to go on Twitter and defend yourself against all of this obviously felt wrong. This isn't a thing that can be done in tweets. Also, all of those people writing to me had never met Kel or me. This is Kelly's friend Aseye, who's now 28.
The way it looks like on the outside, the way that it's been twisted to seem like this white man has taken advantage of this young black girl. And it's because I know, being inside it and knowing you both as individuals, you know, I know that there is literally nothing. You've had this whole thing that was created is just utter and complete tripe and bullshit. People believed her even more because of her race and also because they had no idea who Kelly was, who also was a black woman as well. But they just believed this woman. I don't understand how people cannot see that she's mentally unstable, but I suppose she's manipulative in such a way that she can paint an image.
I mean, I can see that might create problems for people listening to this, because I've told you all of these allegations that have been made about me, and then now I'm the person who's narrating Kelly's story. I don't know how to help you with that, actually. You know, you're either someone who thinks innocent till proven guilty, or you're someone who thinks there's no smoke without fire. I don't. But I will say this. There's no middle ground in this story. If you believe Kel's mother, someone who didn't see Kelly for 6 years and certainly has no witnesses to the kind of behaviour she describes, you'll believe already that I turned Kel against her mother for my own dark ends, and that I've coerced and manipulated everybody that you're going to hear speak. However, if you believe the 18 people that you're going to hear in these podcasts who have been drawn from every corner of Kel's life, including, most importantly, the words that you'll hear Kel speak, and the words of about a dozen other people that you'll read as we go along, you'll find yourself believing something very different. A story that is not quite as sensational, but one that is just as extreme, and all the more disturbing for the fact that it's true. The harm to my personal reputation aside, there are some really troubling things to have emerged from this online campaign. The first is that the mother sold it to people as a political cause, and people bought it. She framed it as an issue of needing to raise awareness about what was happening to young black girls in the Caribbean community. White predators like me didn't just groom the children, we groomed their families and entire communities. On the back of this, more prominent sources now started to line up behind the mother. Black Lives Matter told their followers that Kelly's mother was caught up in a horrific legal battle against an abusive man, and urged everyone to donate to the mother's legal fees and share the news. The mother said that she had the support of the MPs Diane Abbott and Joe Swinson. Campaigners like Owen Jones and Ash Sarkar retweeted and commented in support of the mother's case. Lee Jasper, the former equalities advisor to the Mayor of London, described the case as an example of how white male privilege in Britain extended to black people beyond death. He promised readers would be utterly disgusted at the racism and horror endured by Kelly's mother in seeking to bury her daughter. People donated thousands of pounds to the mother's PayPal account. She tweeted, "The support I'm being shown is breathtaking." The mother's GoFundMe promised that ours would be a landmark case which would expose issues of grooming and child sexual exploitation. A comedy benefit was held to raise money for the mother's cause, featuring stars of Live at the Apollo, itself publicised by other well-known comedians. This is a saying.
So my friend, she's another black girl, and we were talking about how fucked up it was because a black woman and how she was using that to get away with what she was doing. But it was almost like you were challenging your own belief system, because even I remember saying to her, because she's another black woman, and you're like, in another situation you would have supported her because you know. But then that's when my friend made the distinction. She was like, yeah, but Kelly was a black girl too.
These are Kelly's friends, Tobiana and Katie.
When this first happened, it made me have a bit of a crisis of being like, how many times have I read something and been like, oh God, like that's a terrible miscarriage of justice, or what a travesty that is, or how horrible that this happened to this person. Because I was like, if I read this story from an outside point of view, I would be like, oh my God. And then I think, like, how can you believe anything?
The burden of proof is on the mother. And the burden of being a fucking rational human being who looks at all the evidence and doesn't witch hunt people like we're in the fucking crucible is on every single person on this planet. And they didn't meet that.
There are literally millions of girls out there who have been trafficked, but Kelly was not one of them. And for her to jump on board that and try and claim that she was is so fucking insulting to every girl who ever has been. And every girl who has been sexually abused or been forced into prostitution or any of those things like she's claiming Kelly was when she wasn't. Like, there's no question about this. We all know her. You guys grew up with her. I knew her for the last 2.5 years of her life, and like very, very closely. I saw her every day. Like, all the people in her life who knew it. This is not something that's up for debate. We know it didn't happen. And for her to claim that is so insulting to everybody who has gone through that.
If I didn't know anything about this, I would ask myself, why would a mother put herself in this situation if she wasn't telling the truth? I think the thing that counted against us more than anything when people were reading the mother's tweets was that she was the mother. The fact that anyone could challenge the rights of a mother in that situation was really core to a lot of people's offence. What kind of a man takes a grieving mother to court to deny her the right to bury her daughter as she sees fit? Disgusting. I don't know the details of what happened to this young lady, but you must be one sick piece of evil shit taking a grieving mother to court over her dead child's body. For goodness sake, said one person, let this mother have her daughter. That bond is too strong to obstruct. To fight this is to show no understanding. But this had not been Kelly's experience of being brought up by her mother. This is Uncle Des.
Yeah.
People think the word, when they hear the word mother, means loving, caring, nurturing. It doesn't cover this, and it doesn't cover a lot of other cases. Just because somebody gave birth to you doesn't mean they're your mother. Yeah, just because you had a child doesn't mean you're their father. So when you mention the word mother, it means you're immediately, we all have a mother. There is a good memory somewhere along the lines. With Kel, there wasn't.
Tobiana.
It's 2018. Everybody has other people in their life, like whether it be step parents, whether it be adoptive parents, anything. There's just so many different ways that people get influenced. Just giving birth to somebody doesn't give you the right to anything. It's your behaviour and the way that you treat that person that gives you the right to something.
The thing that upset those of us close to Kel more than anything else, though, was this idea of Kel that the mother was putting out. Remember, this is somebody who Kelly hadn't seen for 7 years, had had no contact with for nearly 6, and hadn't lived with since the beginning of 2010. She simply had no idea who Kelly really was. But that didn't stop her. They think I will be ashamed of what they turned my child into, she tweeted at one point. But who was that person? Who did the mother claim that Kelly had been? The answer was a passive victim, a blank, who had been ruthlessly exploited on sexual and racial grounds. But as usual, she couldn't resist making the situation as somehow being about her. I sadly think her looking like me was the poor girl's downfall. She had the look, but not the personality. She was very gentle and passive. That always scared me about her. I stupidly shared that with him, and he took advantage. Elsewhere, she describes Kel as a black unicorn, a young black woman who's not seen as a victim, and so she's preyed upon and discarded. This idea of Kelly was the fuel for this campaign, picked up on by others who described Kelly as a poor, frightened child who'd been stalked and hunted, overwhelmed, overpowered. Her every move had been controlled. Kelly had been isolated. What nobody, except those of us who had been in Kel's life, knew was that this characterization of Kel, these accounts of Kel's abuse, were in fact projections of the isolating and controlling behaviours that her mother had subjected her to growing up, culminating in a 2-month period just before Kelly was eventually sent to Barbados as a teenager, in which the mother confined Kelly to the flat they were staying in. She had removed her from school, had kept her locked up, and subjected her to random physical attacks, with Kel unable to contact the outside world and being regularly threatened if she spoke out about what was happening. And if all of that sounds dramatic, that's because it was. But nobody knew that except us. Instead now, once we finally went to trial, the newspapers dutifully repeated the mother's vile allegations. Kelly had died as a sex worker with drug and alcohol issues, because as an adult she'd fallen into bad company where she'd been groomed, abused, and coerced. None of which was true. This is Tobiana.
I just don't like the whole image that the mother portrayed of Kel as being this like weak, submissive girl, because she was not. It could not be further from the truth. It could not be further from the truth. Like, mate, you wouldn't have wanted to argue with her about anything. Like, she stood up for her rights and she was fierce, and she didn't, in her life, she didn't buy into like needing to use her race like her mother does.
There was so much speculation about Kel and her life online. And this is a really small thing, but actually this got to everyone as much as anything. So as part of her daily Twitter rants, One of the mother's riffs was talking about how none of the evidence that we had submitted to the trial of Kel's words, what she'd said in correspondence and WhatsApps and so on to friends, that none of that was her. That all of that had been created and written by me. And this idea was picked up on by people who then went through Kelly's social media accounts. But the internalized racism of these people who were supposedly fighting this anti-racist cause was both really offensive but also quite funny. They were inclined to believe that I had written Kel's social media posts on the sole basis that no young black woman could write good English and have broad cultural references. It may be me, said one, but the above does not seem like it was written by a teenage black girl from South London. The whole syntax is off. And in response to a post that Kelly had put up about her cat, Bowie, who she had named, another poster wrote, "What does a teenage black girl from South London know about Bowie?"
Is Chilean burgundy not an oxymoron?
I would say like Chile for the country, but then Chilean to describe like, you know, something of Chile.
Kelly, in fact, was very sophisticated in her taste, and she read deeply and widely, and she was fascinated with language. Bowie was Kel's cat, so named by her because the cat had different colour eyes, just like David Bowie. When I was speaking with Aseye, at one point, Bowie wandered over the table.
She was very honest and assertive, and she would tell you how she felt about things. Your cat. Is that your cat?
That's her cat.
Is that her cat?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, yeah, you've got cats.
This is Bowie.
Yeah, I do remember Bowie, yeah. And she was smart, like, she knew so much. Even that name, Bowie, has made me think, like, you know a lot about popular culture and stuff like that. She
See trolls who went through her Instagram who all think that I created her accounts. We're going, what does a teenage black girl from South London...
Is she from South?
No, she's not from South, and she wasn't a teenager at the time. She was
that's
in her 20s.
stereotypes that they have about black people.
Exactly.
And I think that's also why we bonded, because we didn't fit with that narrative about what stereotypically black girls were supposed to be. And we were both judged for it. I remember she used to say, like, people used to talk about the way she spoke and make fun of the way she spoke and say, oh, you sound white. And I was like, yeah, they used to say that about me. The fact that they've said that just shows their own kind of judgment and stereotypes, because quite frankly, not every single black person in this country has the same experience. But I don't know, we never really spoke much about how that made an impact on her. But I remember she saying talking about the way that she spoke and how people would kind of say, why do you talk like that? Why do you sound like that?
Kelly had a conscious and clear-headed attitude to her identity as a black woman, and she stood up for herself and for other people if she encountered bad behaviour. For example, here's a voice recording that she left her friend at the end of 2017. Kel was a chef. She was working as a chef de partie at the Sky Garden in London. She's just witnessed a racist incident against a colleague at work, and she stuck up for that colleague, and she's made a complaint.
Yeah, I had to step outside because I'm literally like trying to stand there at work and we're not very busy, so I don't have anything to distract me, and like my hands are shaking. I'm like getting really mad because you like there's zero reason. It doesn't matter how mad you get with somebody. You don't need to bring their race into it. Obviously, I don't need to tell you guys that, right? But basically, the guy he said to the guy who made the comment towards him, he goes, "Why do you have to speak to me like that?" And then our senior sous chef said to the guy, "Oh," he asked him to explain the situation. He explained the situation, the waiter, I mean, and for fuck's sake, the waiter explained the situation, and then the senior sous chef said to him, "Oh, you know, you're right about the situation, but you were wrong as soon as you said that." And I was like, no, this is racism. There's no qualification here. As soon as you said that, you're dead wrong. There's no, you were right about this. There's no picking and choosing. You fucked up. This is an arrestable offense. Remember that woman, Cheryl Cole? I don't know if you guys know her. She's like a celebrity in England now. And we've just conveniently forgotten the fact that she was arrested for calling a woman a black bitch in a nightclub, right? This is not okay here, so you need to report it. So I told him to report it to the manager. I told him to get the guy's name, report it directly to a manager, and so like he reported it to the manager, and then they sent the guy home. But another manager came in and started trying to justify it, saying he's a nice guy, and I'm so sorry. I'm really sorry from the bottom of my heart that this thing came out, but he's such a nice guy, I can't sack him, and I'm just pissed. That kind of shit, you don't say it. What, like, there's zero reason to bring that into an argument.
But Kel also had a suspicion of identity politics and didn't buy into it. There's a piece of audio that I've got that was recorded here in June 2014, and it's really ironic given what was done to her memory by these exact same people after she died. But she's talking about social justice warriors, which was a new thing then, and the rise of the identity-driven left.
There's this whole like internet culture now of like sort of basically what would you call them? Social justice like people. They're really into those kind of theories. So it's like everything you hate is like identity politics, right?
Everything you hate is what?
Everything that they hate or everything that they're into is like sort of identity politics.
Right.
Everything that they're into, that they hate, and it's like really trendy for them to say, you know, I hate white people.
Right. Can't disagree with them.
Even if white. It mostly is white people doing it, actually.
Oh yeah, bloody hell.
Always
Yeah, sure.
I hate what white people have done.
Well, for me, it's always like white people I see in those love music, hate racism t-shirts. But then you go on the website and they advertise it with black people. So they make that the camp. But I've never seen a black person in one of those t-shirts.
I love music and I hate racism. I want to get one.
Yeah, absolutely. Doesn't that apply to everybody? I mean,
Well, apart from racists.
But even racists don't self-identify as racists. They're always saying, I'm not a racist, but very few people go, yeah, I'm a racist.
I'm an unashamed racist.
And in an unashamed way, exactly. Exactly.
I'm an unashamed racist, but that Negro can sing.
Yeah.
I just think Kelly was an individual person that I don't give a fuck about throwing her into a black woman or even woman category. She was a person, she was my best friend. I am actually quite disgusted at how some people on the left have gravitated towards this as a way to push their agenda based on her identity. And I think she would have been disgusted by it because Kelly wasn't a victim in her life. She was an agent, and she would never have wanted people to use her as this fucking placeholder for everything shit that does indisputably happen to black women. She would not have wanted that. She was a real person, and if people want to push their agendas, there are lots of people who are victims to use for your agenda, but Kelly wasn't one of them in that regard. And I think that it's just too complicated for this day and age, where we live in an age of hashtags and clicktivism movements, to really think of her as the real person that she was, a black female who was abused by a black female. It's difficult for people to twist that narrative into something sellable.
So, in the months after Kelly's funeral, the people who were closest to her came here and sat around the kitchen table where she'd spent so much time. A podcast felt like it was the best way to set the record straight, to let the few thousand people who'd taken an interest in it know the truth of it. But then something happened, because we spoke not just about the scandal or who Kelly had really been and why she wasn't like the picture that had been painted of her. We spoke about all of it. Every aspect of her life. People spoke for hours, and the conversations got deep and wide-ranging. For some, it was like a dam bursting. This is Kel's friend Romina.
I really need anyone who hears me speak to understand how much it means to me. How much it means to me to open it and say it and to let people hear it. This stuff with Kel is stuff I protected for years. Like, while she was alive, it was stuff I protected. I don't know how to explain it, but to let everyone know that she suffered so much was opening her up to loads of people who didn't know her. So it's so important, to me at least, that they listen with an unbiased mind and they do kind of try to believe me, because I wouldn't tell this story otherwise. I wouldn't. It means too much for somebody with a narrow mind to dismiss it. Do you know what I mean?
People came wanting to defend their friend, but the more we spoke, the more it was just, people just wanting to figure out what the fuck had happened and why it had happened. We'd been through a trial, an inquest, there'd been all of that speculation, and nobody had asked the question, or if they had asked the question, they were just so blinded by what they knew the answers were. But nobody had seriously tried to say why. Why had this beautiful, funny, hopeful, quizzical, curious person, why had she gone? Why had she gone in this way? And the more we spoke about it, the more levels to it there were, and the more complex and troubling the question became. And the closer I got to understanding something of how Kelly must have felt. Kel and I had been close, but I came to understand that in important ways, I'd minimised what she'd been through, and in certain ways I hadn't known her at all. 2 things died on April the 7th, 2018. The second was the narrative that I'd had in my head about Kel and how she was basically going to be all right. The one that said that she was struggled, but she was getting better. And the gap between my story of Kel and Kel's suicide was her pain, and this podcast is about that. It's not a sensational wham-bam story about a young girl who burned herself out because she took too many drugs or fell into bad company. There are no easy answers in this story, and this podcast isn't meant to be a piece of entertainment. It's testimony. It's grief. It's certainly therapy. It's an attempt to try and understand what happened to her, because we miss her so much. But primarily, it's her truth, as best we can tell it by the people who are closest to her, and by Kel herself. This is a podcast for Kel.
My poor baby girl. My poor baby girl was fucking dragged through mud a lot, even in death. I couldn't even believe that actually, even in death, she'd just get dragged through so much mud. Everything would just come to surface. Everything should be mortified to know. For all the reasons that I protected all of the things that she went through, that I didn't want anyone who didn't know her, didn't understand her, and didn't care about her to have an opinion. That was me protecting her. The same way she protected herself, she did the same. She kept her chin up and she carried on walking, because she didn't want your judgment. She didn't want to permit people to think less of her or to know things about her that might lead to them not understanding her. I feel like it's really important that people understand her when they listen to this. That it wasn't easy for her to do the things she did. It wasn't easy for her to feel the things she felt. And she definitely didn't bring it on herself. If you don't understand her, then you might think something awful, and it's not true. It's not.